Mindy Newell's letter from Swamp Thing number 46. Dear Alan, I am woman. Stand not between me and my wrath. The words above are written by you, taken from Swamp Thing number 40, The Curse. They are strong words, words that are meant as a warning. Do not underestimate me any longer, she is saying. You face a formidable enemy. I have worn the mask of servitude long enough. It is my turn now. So what does the lady in question do? Kill herself. Great answer, Alan. Right up there on the game board of Family Feud. Right up there with staying with the wife-beater of a husband, or living with a sexual pervert who abuses your kids. Get a kiss from Richard Dawson and everything will be all right. Where's the strength in suicide? Before I was a writer, I was a nurse. During schooling, I had a stint in psychiatric nursing. We had a patient kill himself. Yes, the repercussions on the family were horrible, blaming themselves, wishing he was still there so they could make it up to him. Yes, they learned the hard way to grow a little wiser. But what did the patient learn? Nothing, except perhaps what it feels like that split second before death to have yourself mashed and torn and turned to rubble. Yes, he was psychotic. Yes, he was depressed. Your story implies that menstruation turns women into raving maniacs and fallen depressives. Yes, I know all about PMS. Unfortunately, like everything else, it has become a catchphrase, a net to snare the misunderstood, a loophole for lawyers. I understand what you were trying to point out, that unless we all stop having preconceived notions of how we are supposed to behave, we are all as doomed as the poor woman in the story. And on a more intimate scale, I also understand that you were trying to point out to our male audience that women don't deserve to be treated in such a horrific manner, that you were striking a blow, not just for equal rights, but for equal understanding. But how can there be equal understanding between partners when one of them lies dead under the howling moon? The dead do not hear, Alan, despite our wishes, and if they do, they are forbidden to answer. Anyway, I doubt very much if Roy has learned anything from this episode. My best guess is that he will mourn for a time, but sooner or later the guilt he feels over Phoebe's suicide will turn to callous anger. Oh well, she was always a bit loony anyway, and he'll get on with his life. So there are losers all the way around. And why does Phoebe kill herself? You can beat around the bush all you want, but in the end, she killed herself because she was born a woman. Great message, Alan. Right up there with the morning prayer of Orthodox Jews. Blessed art thou, O Lord, our God, who maketh me not a woman. Don't misunderstand. I'm not concerned about you, or the adult members of our audience. But what about the others? The ones who will read the story, and, like Roy, will say, yeah, women. Only good for one thing. In these days of growing pains for human liberation, not just women's, I believe it is important to confirm the importance of everyone's ego, to encourage the growth of self-actualization, if you will. Sometimes I think men are afraid of women. The ancient fears are still deep within us all, and women hold the secret of life within their bodies. At least, that is how the ancients thought. They didn't know about the production of sperm, of course, without which, what good are all the ova? All those men knew was that life blossomed within women's bodies. The terror they felt, the awe they felt, was transferred into the matriarchal religions of pre-Christian, pre-Semite, pre-Hellenic days. That's how far back the mystique of womanhood goes. But there is no mystique. It's all just part of life, part of nature. Menstruation is a sign of life. It is not blood in the purest sense. It's made of the endomaterial layers of the uterus which are discarded when no child is conceived. Without menstruation, there is no health. Without health, there is no blossoming of new life. The curse is not being born a woman, Alan. It's not the monarch, and it's not being born a man. It's giving up, giving in, throwing in the towel, not believing in yourself. Sure, it's hard. I've had my share of life's bruises. Life stinks sometimes. But the answer doesn't lie in suicide. And I'm really afraid that some kid out there is going to wake up some morning in his 11th, 12th, 13th, or 14th year and find her bedsheets stained red, and she'll believe her life will be cursed from then on, and, like Phoebe, will never be able to look at the moon in innocent wonder again, until it is too late. Sincerely, Mindy Newell, somewhere in the swamplands of New Jersey. P.S. I'm voting for the story in next year's CBGA Awards and Kirby Awards. Mr. Moore replies, Dear Mindy, Perhaps it would be best if I started out by saying that on one level I have no argument with the majority of what you say. It's a valid reaction to the story, and although it certainly wasn't the reaction I intended, it's a fair one. If the story was open to misinterpretation, then that's my fault rather than yours. I certainly wouldn't disagree with your contention that suicide is a lousy, pathetic, and worthless solution to life's problems. In the past, I've been presented with the unfortunate opportunity to talk with people close to me who, for one reason or another, have decided it would be better to stop living. I think I understand a little of what that's about, and I don't think it's anything good. However, the character Phoebe, in the story, wasn't really intended as a role model. She was intended to be a sympathetic, but that isn't the same thing. I don't think you'd disagree that while a truly strong and well-adjusted person of either gender would not include suicide as a viable option, there exist a great number of people in the real world who do decide to take that way out, and who feel that may have a justifiable reason for doing so. Suicide happens. I dare say it sometimes happens because people have a great wealth of accumulated anger and no one to spend it on other than themselves, as was the case in The Curse. I don't think that depicting the circumstances leading up to something like that is the same thing as endorsing it. Regarding the "I am woman" line in the light of the above, I'll agree that using it was a risky proposition, and obviously in your case the line set off a reaction that wasn't really intended. As I saw it while writing the story, the fact that the line issues from a furious and slavering werewolf should have been enough to tip off the reader that what we were dealing with here was simply one aspect of a woman and her nature, rather than trying to imply that this howling and ultimately self-destructive monstrosity was in some way the exclusive true face of womankind. The choices of using a werewolf to symbolize the frustrated anger that some women obviously do feel was made as much on the basis of Swamp Thing being a horror-oriented title as anything else. In other contexts, the "I am woman" line would have been just as appropriate if used by a moon goddess, a bag lady, a supermarket checkout girl, or even Helen Reddy. If I'd wanted to be more meticulous and exact, I could have changed the line to something like "I am one aspect of woman," albeit not necessarily a positive one. But I don't think that scans so well. I certainly didn't mean the line to read, "I am all that woman can aspire to," even though that may well have been the hopeless and despairing viewpoint of the woman in the story. Admittedly, the story did paint a pretty bleak and grim picture of a woman's lot. To understand why this should be so, you have to consider that the audience I'm writing for in Swamp Thing is predominantly male. I know a lot of women do read the book, and I generally wish there were more, but in the final analysis, the female readership of this or most other comic books is only a fraction of the male audience. Thus, for a story like The Curse to have the maximum impact upon the people actually reading it, I figured that a downbeaten, pessimistic portrayal was more likely to stick in the mind and have repercussions than a story with a cheerful and upbeat resolution that would have enabled the reader to feel that all was right with the world and that the problems would probably sort themselves out, given time. The feeling I wanted my hypothetical male reader to be left with at the end of the story was a sensation that some women have very grievous cause for complaint about the way they feel forced to live in predominantly male-oriented society. More than that, I wanted the reader to feel that the situation was at least partly his responsibility and was perhaps something that he should dedicate some thought to. If you'll permit me a moment's levity, while it would have been more positive and uplifting for the werewolf to join a consciousness-raising group and learn to articulate her hostility, I think the ending I used was better. Finally, your statement that the curse implies that menstruation turns women into raving maniacs and fallen depressives is something that I really have to take issue with. I think it may have resulted from misinterpretation of the story's title, so perhaps I better explain even though I'd obviously rather the story had been good enough to explain it for me. Firstly, whenever I can, I like my story titles to have more than one layer of meaning and relevance to the story. With The Curse, obviously, it refers to the standard Curse of the Werewolves. Horror story title of long standing, it also refers to the standard slang expression for menstruation, which, as you observe, somehow implies that menstruation is a terrible and unclean thing that women are afflicted with. In context of my story, however, by the end of the book, I'd hope that the reader might have seen a possible third interpretation to its title. I wanted to suggest that the real curse isn't menstruation, but rather men's attitude to it, and by extension their attitude to women as a whole. I wanted to get across, without being heavy-handed, that it is the way in which men see and treat women that can often crush and trample women's minds and personalities into such tortured and self-destructive shapes. Throughout the story, there are incidental images of women from a male point of view. The women on the billboards and on the posters in the adult bookstore window, the mannequins in the bridal boutique, and the shuffling and dazed-looking woman in the supermarket. With these images contrasted against the confinement of the Pennamaquat women, I wanted to suggest that the mistreatment of women, either physically or psychologically, was something that went back a long way, something that had almost become completely institutionalized as part of our social outlook. That, as I see it, is the curse, along with the adjacent catch-22 that even when women can express their anger, they're only allowed to do it in male terms, by which token they've already lost. I'd like to think that Phoebe showed considerable courage in the story by realizing that killing was not what women did, and by restraining herself and dashing Roy's brains out. Her final alternative solution wasn't much better, admittedly, but it preserved a certain integrity, given the emotional state of the character. Anyway, I'm sorry that the story upset you, and hope you'll accept that it wasn't intended in quite the light that you saw it in. I think I should also point out in my own defense that we did have a predominantly good reaction from most of the women who read and commented on the story, even though I haven't shown it to my mother yet. Thanks again for writing and for providing a chance to discuss the issue in such a previously unlikely arena. Remember when all people wanted to know was whether Arcane was coming back or not? Best, Alan Moore, somewhere near an American missile base in rural England.